I'm an 18-year-old girl living alone in an apartment with my dog. My place is about 8 miles out of the city, so ordering food delivery can sometimes be a bit of a hassle. I never thought Uber Eats could be dangerous. You hear stories, sure, but you never really believe something like that could happen to you. At least, I didn't. It was a Friday evening, and I was cleaning up the apartment because my boyfriend was coming over the next day. We're in a long-distance relationship, so whenever he visits, I like everything to be clean and nice for him. After 2 hours of cleaning, it was around 6 p.m. and I was starving. I didn't want to dirty any dishes again since I just cleaned everything, so I decided to order food. I placed my order and got a notification that my driver was on the way in a white Honda Fit Sport. Since I live alone, I always request contactless delivery and ask them to leave the food at my door. I was in the living room watching TV when I got the notification that my food had been delivered. I was so hungry, I immediately went to the door, but there was nothing there. I thought maybe the driver had left it at the wrong apartment, so I checked the neighboring doors. Still nothing. I went back inside to message the driver, but before I could, there was a knock at my door. It was my neighbor, holding my food bag. He said, "Hey, sorry, I took your food from the driver because he was peeking through your windows, and I got a weird feeling about it." I thanked him, kind of stunned, and went back inside. I ate, watched a movie, and started getting ready for bed. I showered, locked every door, turned off the lights, and lay in bed talking to my boyfriend on the phone until I eventually fell asleep. That night, I kept waking up because my little dog, who barely weighs 5 pounds, kept growling at the windows and the back door. He's tiny, but when he growls like that out of nowhere, it sends chills down your spine. I tried calming him down and went back to sleep. About 15 minutes later, I suddenly heard loud banging on my bedroom window. My dog went ballistic, barking and screaming. I froze in bed. I pulled the blanket over my head, leaving just enough space to peek at the window. I whispered to call 911 and told the operator that someone was in my backyard. I explained that my bedroom window doesn't lock properly. It could be opened pretty easily. She told me to grab something to protect myself and get to another room while police were on the way. I quietly went to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and waited. It felt like time had stopped. I peeked out the kitchen window, and what I saw made my stomach drop. That same Uber driver's car was parked outside my apartment. There's a big open field in front where people usually walk their dogs or park trailers. The car was there, but it was empty. That's when it hit me. He was in the backyard. Finally, the police arrived. I was shaking and crying while explaining everything. One officer went to check the backyard where my window was, and another went to inspect the car. The car was still empty. It had rained earlier, and the backyard was muddy. There were clear footprints right under my window. My heart felt like it was going to explode. If he wasn't in the car or with the cops, where was he? My neighbor came out and told the police what he had seen earlier. The officers offered to let me sleep at his place for the night, but I politely declined. After everything calmed down and the police left, I convinced myself it was over and finally managed to fall asleep. Barely. But around 2 a.m. there was a loud knock on the door. "Police!" My heart dropped. It was the same female officer from earlier. She told me that police had been secretly monitoring the area around my apartment just in case the guy came back. And he did. He had returned and was creeping up to my front door when they caught and arrested him. She told me, "You don't have to worry anymore. He's in custody." I thanked her, but I couldn't sleep again that night. Now, I never use Uber Eats when I'm home alone. Back in 2014, I used the Uber app quite a bit because I wasn't allowed to drive for 12 months due to some DUI charges. A stupid mistake on my part. There's a nightclub bar in my city that I used to go to on weekends with friends. Sometimes, if we had a designated driver, they'd drop us off at home. Otherwise, we'd just call an Uber. That night, I wasn't feeling too great, so I left the club a little early. It was sometime between 1 and 2 a.m. and freezing outside, so I pulled up the Uber app. A nearby driver named Alex was available. Honestly, he looked kind of creepy. Older, not smiling in his photo, grayish-white goatee, and wearing a black beanie. But he was only a couple miles away, and the app said he was driving a Chevy Malibu, which sounded fine to me, so I went ahead and requested the ride. I was sitting on a bench outside the club with a bouncer standing nearby, completely still with his arms crossed like a statue. About 5 minutes later, a silver 2003 Chevy Malibu pulled up in front of me. I stood up, a little disappointed. The car looked really old and beat up. The driver didn't call out or honk, just silently pulled over. I got up and got into the back seat right away. From the start, the vibe was strange. He didn't say hi, didn't greet me, didn't even look at me. In a really low voice, he just asked, "Where you headed?" I gave him my address. We started driving, but he went in the opposite direction of my house. I pointed it out, and he eventually made a left turn at the next light. Now we were leaving the main roads and heading into quiet residential areas. He hadn't put my address into his phone, which felt off to me. I wasn't sure if he expected me to guide him or if he was just figuring it out on his own. Finally, I opened the GPS on my own phone and started navigating aloud so he could hear. When the GPS said to make a left at the next street, he ignored it. I waved my hand, confused. And that's when he said, "Just gotta make a quick stop. Don't worry, I'll give you a discount." Even though I was tipsy, I could tell something wasn't right. That's when I noticed there was a handgun sitting next to the glove box on the passenger side. Now, I was seriously thinking about how to get out of the car. At the next red light, I quietly tested the door handle. It didn't open. That's when I realized the child lock was on. My heart started pounding. He had already driven me way past my neighborhood, probably 2 towns over. I was terrified. I couldn't call the police. I had no idea how he would react. My best option seemed to be somehow getting to the child lock button near the driver's seat and disabling it. To do that, I had to quietly slide from the back seat to the seat right behind him, hoping he wouldn't notice. I kept my eyes locked on his head through the rearview mirror. When he turned his head the other way, I slowly slid over. Then came the most dangerous moment. I had to lean forward and hit the child lock switch when the car stopped at a red light. And that moment finally came. The car came to a stop, and I quickly reached forward to unlock the door. He freaked out, jumped in his seat, and just as I feared, reached for the gun. But I managed to open the door in time and bolted out toward a nearby Escalade, banging hard on the windows, yelling, "Help me!" They ignored me and drove off, but it didn't matter. That man sped off in his Malibu and disappeared into the night. I ran into a nearby 24-hour grocery store and called a cab from there. Strangely, I didn't feel drunk at all once I was in the store or the taxi. I reported the incident to Uber, and they told me they'd pass it along to the police. A week later, a police officer came to my door and asked a few questions, and that was it. That's where the whole thing ended. To this day, I have no idea what happened to that guy, but I never used Uber again. Back in 2020, when the pandemic had the world in chaos, I started driving for Uber to make ends meet. My retail job had been cut, and I needed to make money fast. Driving rideshare, especially at night like I was doing, means you meet all kinds of people. There are always weird moments, drunk passengers, odd conversations, but nothing compared to one Friday night in October. It was just after midnight. I had dropped someone off at a hotel on the edge of town and had just turned around when the Uber app buzzed with a new ride request. The pickup location was in front of a bowling alley in a strip mall, about 6 minutes away. The rider's name was Derek. I accepted the trip and headed over. When I arrived, the place was completely deserted. The parking lot lights were dim, no cars around, and the bowling alley looked closed. Under one of the lights stood a man, tall, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, and he was staring down at his shoes. As I pulled up, he looked at me, but didn't wave or move. I rolled down my window and asked, "Are you Derek?" He gave a slow nod and got into the back seat. I started the trip and asked if the address in the app was correct. He replied, "Yeah, that's the one." His voice was completely flat, no emotion. He didn't sound drunk or high, just off. He stayed completely silent for the first 5 or 6 minutes. Every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, he was staring directly at my neck. Not at his phone, not out the window, just locked in on me. Trying to ease the tension, I asked, "How's your night going?" He said, "Just had to get out of there." I asked, "Out of where?" His answer, "Doesn't matter." So I didn't push further. About 15 minutes in, we were approaching a rural area. No streetlights, big front yards, trees everywhere. Then, suddenly, he leaned forward and said, "Turn into that driveway on the right." He pointed to an old, run-down house. It was dark, with an overgrown lawn and paint peeling off the sides. No lights, no cars. I hesitated and asked, "Is this your house?" He said, "Just pull in." Against my instincts, I pulled into the driveway and stopped, but he didn't get out. I turned and asked, "Everything okay?" He looked toward the house and said, "Just wait here." Then he got out and walked around the side of the house, vanishing into the darkness. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes, unsure of what to do. The ride hadn't ended on the app, but my gut told me something was seriously wrong. I ended the trip manually and began backing up, but just as I put the car in reverse, I saw him coming back quickly. His hands were empty, but his face looked different. There was something in his expression, a mix of anger and something else. Excitement, maybe. I unlocked the doors so nothing would escalate, but deep down I was thinking, don't let him back in. He got in anyway, sat down and said, "Take me to another location." I asked, "Where to?" And he replied, "Just drive." I'll tell you. I told him he needed to enter the destination into the app, but he stayed silent for a few moments. Then he said, "Take me back to where you picked me up." I didn't argue. I just started driving. The ride back was suffocating, silent but heavy, like he was still watching me. I asked, "Rough night, huh?" He replied, "You could say that." I followed up with, "Is everything okay?" And he said, "Not yet." That was the last thing he said. We arrived back at the strip mall. I pulled into the same spot I had picked him up from. Then he leaned forward and asked, "You ever wonder how you're gonna die?" That stopped me cold. I tried to laugh it off. Nah, not something I think about. He didn't laugh. He leaned back, stared straight ahead, and said, "I think about it all the time." He opened the door but didn't step out right away. He stood there, half in and half out of the car, looking right at me. Then he said, "You picked up the wrong guy tonight." He shut the door and walked off into the darkness behind the bowling alley. I stayed in the car, frozen. When I finally got home, I checked the app. Something felt off. The name had changed. There was no profile picture, no trip history. It was like the ride never even happened. I contacted Uber support, and they told me there was no data available. Maybe the app glitched, or the rider canceled the trip. But I know what happened. He got in, he spoke, he left, and he definitely said, "You picked up the wrong guy tonight." I never saw him again. I hope I never do. But now, whenever I get a ride request from a quiet parking lot, or someone sits silently in the back seat, I think about that night. And I wonder, maybe he was going to do something, but changed his mind. Or maybe he just wanted to scare someone. Whatever it was, I still think about it. And sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, just looking for the right car. This incident happened in 2021, back when I was driving Uber full-time. I live in a city that gets a heavy influx of tourists in the summer. So, if you stay consistent with rideshare work, you can make pretty good money. I usually drove at night, partly because I'm a night owl anyway, and partly because there's less traffic and drunk passengers coming back from bars tend to tip well. The night this happened, it was around 1:30 a.m., just a typical Saturday night. I had just dropped off a group of loud, rowdy college kids and was honestly glad when I got another ride request that seemed quieter. The rider's name was Chris, and the pickup location was a small side street near the downtown area. What struck me as odd was that the pin wasn't near any bars or apartments, but rather behind an old strip mall. I figured maybe GPS was acting up. It happens. When I got there, I saw a guy standing on the corner. He was wearing a hoodie and jeans, staring down at his phone. I pulled up and said, "Chris." He nodded and got in the back without saying a word. He didn't smell like alcohol or seem intoxicated. He was completely sober, just very quiet. No greeting, no response to my, "How's your night going?" Nothing. Some people just aren't talkers, so I didn't think too much of it. We started the trip. His drop-off was on the other side of town, about a 25-minute drive, in a suburban neighborhood I'd only been to once or twice before. The problem was, The area was pretty isolated. Some streets didn't even have lights. About 5 minutes in, I noticed Chris was holding his phone, not calling or texting, just using the flashlight. He had it on, resting in his lap, and the beam was faintly shining toward the back of my seat. I laughed and asked, "Everything okay back there?" He just said, "Yeah," and turned the flashlight off. The next 20 minutes were dead silent, just the sound of the car and a growing sense of tension that I couldn't quite explain. It felt off, like he was there, but not really there, not threatening, just wrong. We reached the destination. According to the GPS, this was the house, but it was completely dark. No porch light, no lights inside, nothing. I asked, "Is this the place?" Chris didn't answer. I turned around and asked again, louder, "Hello?" "This it?" He just stared out the window. I asked a third time, and finally he nodded. I parked and said, "Have a good night." He didn't move. I asked, "You good?" Then, slowly, he opened the door and got out, but didn't close it. He just stood there, facing the house. I waited. A few moments passed, then 20 seconds, then a full minute. I was about to say something when suddenly he turned around, looked at me and said, "I need to go back." I blinked. "Back where?" he said. "Where you picked me up." His voice had no emotion. I was confused. It was a 25-minute ride. I said, "You'll need to request a new trip on the app." He just stared at me. Then he quietly said, "Please, I need to go back." I repeated, "You got to request it in the app." That's when he said something that sent chills down my spine. He said, "I can't. They're not gone yet." I said, "Who's not gone?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, breathing heavily. Now I was genuinely freaked out. I told him, "Look, I can't give you a ride unless you book it through the app." He stared for a moment, then stepped back and quietly shut the door. Then he walked toward the house. Completely dark, still no signs of life. I pulled away, turned the corner, ended the ride, and headed back toward the city. About 10 minutes later, I stopped at a 24-hour gas station, used the restroom, grabbed a bottle of water, and stepped back outside about 4 minutes later, and my blood ran cold. Chris was sitting in the back seat again. Same hoodie, same silence. I was sure I had locked the doors. How did he get in? I got into the driver's seat, staring at him through the rearview mirror. I asked, "How did you get in?" He just said, "Take me back." I said, "I'm calling the police," and reached for my phone. Then he leaned forward, so close I could hear his breathing, and said, "They're still in the house." I don't know why, but I didn't call the police. Maybe it was his voice. There was something in it, something broken, something lost. I softly asked, "Whose house is that?" He said, "My parents'." I asked, "Do you live there?" He said, "Not anymore." My whole body tensed. I turned the car around and started driving back. The whole ride, he sat in the back breathing heavily, rocking just slightly. At one point he whispered, "They're still there. They never leave, no matter what you do." We arrived at the house again. Still no lights, no movement. He got out without a word and walked to the front door. He didn't knock, didn't go in, just stood there. I waited for a minute, then drove off, locked the doors this time, triple-checked. I parked a few blocks away under a streetlight and sat there for 10 minutes, heart pounding. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? No crime had happened, just a man, who got into my car twice and said some really disturbing things. I eventually went home. Didn't sleep a wink that night. The next day, I reported the incident to Uber. And honestly, I regret not calling the police. Maybe he was mentally unwell. Maybe he needed help. Who knows if that really was his parents' house, or something else, or if he was just lost in some kind of manic episode.